This is the Gen Y Leaders Podcast. Welcome to the Gen Y Leaders Podcast, where we guide millennials to become the next generation of business leaders and entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Eric Huey, and multiple times a month, we bring you interviews from high-performing millennials who are challenging perceptions and changing expectations of our generation. Our mission is to help you overcome fear, take action, and go confidently in the direction of your dreams. It's time to start preparing now, mainly because 10,000 baby boomers are retiring every day, which will create a vacuum of career opportunities that you've been waiting for. Will you be ready? Lisa Smith, welcome to the Gen Y Leaders Podcast.
Thank you, Eric. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time. It'll be a good conversation today. Usual question right off the bat is just who are you and what do you do?
Well, as we already established, I'm Lisa Smith. I've been an entrepreneur now, depending on how you count it, full-time for almost 2 years now. And starting as far back as probably 7 or 8 years ago, my husband has a serious entrepreneurial streak. And as soon as I met him, he started to sort of wrap me into that. And we started out with just a little project. It was a little renovation project, which then turned into some rental properties, which then turned into starting a business. So
wow.
He's very persuasive, let's put it that way. So now what I do, I'm the CEO of Dynamize LLC, and we build safety products for the electric utility industry. The whole concept is there's a lot of safety products out there that are good because they're safe, but they actually create barriers to usage. And so you might be safer, but it's more difficult if you're using the safety product. And so our tagline is safety that works. And the idea is it's not only making you safer, but these are products that make you more efficient and that are pleasant to use. They make your work easier at the same time.
Very nice. Yeah. A lot of value added incentive, it sounds like. And
absolutely.
The Ripjack is kind of your go-to main product underneath Dynamize. Is that correct?
Flagship. Yes. The first one. Exactly. Cool. We had to pick a place to start. In retrospect, if we could have done it all over again, we probably would have started with something simpler. But, we were ambitious and we really are solving a significant problem in the industry. Removing the outer jacket of electrical cable currently is extremely difficult, puts between 70 to 150 pounds of pressure on folks' joints.
Wow.
And so there's all kinds of ways that people have come up with for doing that. Everything as primitive as just using pliers to pull it out, to knives, to there's a type of, it's basically floss that's put underneath the cable jacket. And you can find it, and if you can get a hold of it, then maybe you can strip the jacket, but finding it and getting a hold of it is extremely difficult.
Right.
So Ripjack's a power tool that does that process for you safely, easily, and quickly.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for the overview. So you mentioned that you guys are very entrepreneurial and very motivated. Is there anything else behind your underlying motivation, your why, so to speak?
Yeah, we've seen injuries. Part of the reason that my husband, Adam, invented the Ripjack actually is because the guys that he worked around, at the time he was working at a municipality in Missouri, and the guys that he worked around were having serious issues, shoulder surgery, elbows, carpal tunnel, wrists, and they were still in pain after having surgery. And so, and they had been installing underground for, 5, 10, 15 years. And the percentage of underground installs just kept increasing. When he was there about, it's been 6 or 7 years ago now, 80% of their installs were underground, their new installs. And when I last checked about 3 years ago, they were up to about 100% of their new installs were underground. So this was a problem that was only getting bigger, obviously. So he was looking at that, and then we also heard of a case, a gentleman a little further west than Missouri, who actually lost an eye. His plier slipped while he was trying to pull that concentric neutral out of the cable. And so that was sort of the impetus for us of, man, this is really terrible. We don't want people to keep getting hurt. And if we can do something about this, then we feel like we have the responsibility to do that.
Well said. Yeah, no bigger need to solve than the issue of people's health, especially those inline workers on the job. That's huge. So kudos to you guys for identifying that and then taking action on it.
Thank you. I mean, the whole idea is, right, linemen work hard, but they should be able to go home to their families safe and able to do the things that they want to do when they're not on the job, whether that's hunting or sports or whatever. They shouldn't be in pain. They shouldn't have limiting or debilitating injuries just because they've been doing their jobs well. So it's our goal to basically eradicate those to the extent that we can.
Yeah, that's a great point. Decision making and doing due diligence was something that came to mind for you and something that you felt passionate about. So is there anything you want to say about that right off the bat before we kind of dive into a few questions?
Yeah, I think part of why I wanted to talk about decision making is because so I sort of knew it was sort of coming down the pike kind of a thing that we would probably start a business several years before we actually did. And so I started studying all kinds of entrepreneurial resources, and fortunately I'm decently good at researching concepts and topics and then putting the information together, synthesizing it, and being able to use it. And shockingly, I didn't see anything anywhere about decision making, the importance of wise decision making. And maybe it was there and I just missed it, but I don't remember seeing anything about that. Yeah. And so that's something that I think for that reason I'm really passionate about it, because it's critical to everything that you do. It's sort of one of those either umbrella concepts that everything falls under, or a foundational concept that everything that you're doing, you need to be able to stand firm on that, so that you can feel confident and good about the decisions that you're making, and not second guess or realize retrospectively, oops, that was a bad idea. And now I have consequences that I have to try to resolve because of it.
Yeah, that's a great point. So what would you say your general decision-making process looks like at work? Do you have an outline or kind of steps that you follow? What's that look like?
That's a great question. So the very first question is, how complex of a decision are we talking about? Mm-hmm. Basically, how important is the decision? So if it's something like, do people like this button to be green on the website or blue? That's something that's relatively easy to collect information about and then make a decision. There's not a whole lot of layers of complexity to that. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to change, right? If you accidentally made the wrong decision. So for quick decisions, I've got about 4 or 5 things that I think through. A big one, like I just mentioned, is, what's sort of the staying power of this decision? How difficult would it be to reverse or change this decision if I need to? Mm-hmm. And then another question that I typically ask myself is just, what seems right? What feels right? And then I ask myself, why do I think that? In other words, do I have any basis for believing that? Or am I just sort of guessing? And if it's a decision that I've made a decision like that before, and I have a reasonable basis, in other words, I've made good decisions in this realm in the past, and it's not something that is going to be difficult to reverse or change if need be, I can usually make the decision, pretty much right there. The only other item would be, what information do I need to have before I can make this decision? Yeah. So like the example I gave with the button on the website, I'd like information about, well, what have we already tried? Is there an industry standard? And in this case, yes. If you want action, green is a good way to go. Does that fit though with our color scheme on our website? No, it does not. So maybe we can make an exception to the rule and test it and see how it does. So then the last piece of that sort of short decision-making process would be, when am I going to revisit this and evaluate, was this a good decision? Does it need to be improved in any way? Or do we need to go back to the drawing board and consider this as a more complex decision?
Yeah.
So then the complex decision, right? That's the obvious question. Sorry, I'm doing your job for you.
Hey, no, you make it easy. I'll just sit back. I'm going to go grab some popcorn and a drink.
There you go. Yeah. Come back in a while. I'll probably still be talking. So the complex decision is actually a written process that I walk through. And I created this algorithm after a series of decisions that I realized, I don't think I thought through that as thoroughly as I needed to.
Yeah.
And so I thought about whether to actually, print the document off and then like redo the highlights. And I decided, actually, I think that document is sort of one of our trade secrets. So I'll just kind of hit the high points for you.
Cool. Yeah.
Because I've put a lot of time into developing this document. And actually had mentors and other business leaders look at it and give me feedback. And one of the folks that I work with as a business coach actually coaches Fortune 500 executives. And she said that my decision-making process was on par or better than a lot of the ones she's seen them come up with. So I felt pretty great about that.
Yeah, as you should. I might have to pay you for that document behind the scenes.
Right. Well, the problem with a trade secret is once you disclose it, it's no longer a trade secret.
Also a good point.
So, anyways, but so basically the complex decision-making process follows a lot of the same types of tracks as that more simple process, but it also pulls in a lot more resources. So for example, when I think about what decisions have I made like this in the past, I go a lot more in depth with that. So it's not just, oh yeah, I've built websites before. It's more what ROI have we seen from decisions that I've made about the website in the past? Yeah. And then that leads me directly to what resources can I consult that would help me make a good decision about this? And first of all, really, we have to define what is a good decision. What are we defining as the desired outcomes here? So I state that right up front. And then I define how long is it reasonable for me to spend on this decision? So that's directly related to, how significant is it and how long will it take to undo this decision if I need to? So I commit upfront to a time frame for how long this decision is going to take me. And I break it down across a period of time, and I set interim goals for myself for different pieces of the analysis that need to be done by X date. So then going back to resources, I think resources fall in one of three categories, and one would be people. So who do I know who knows something about this, or who in my network knows something about this? And often that's a great place to just sort of camp, right? If you know someone who can solve that problem for you, and you trust them because they have solved similar problems in the past, that's a great place to be. The other two resources would be then, books and online resources, and then just my own experience. So have I made similar decisions to this in the past, even if it's not, so the website example, maybe I don't have any experience with websites, but have I ever chosen a vendor before who could provide a service for us? And so looking for not tangential, but conceptual relationships when decision making can be really helpful. I think the most complex decisions often are when you're looking for someone to do a task for you and you don't know, you know what the outcome is, but you're not exactly sure how to get to that outcome. Right. And so if that's the case, then I think it's really helpful to build interview questions and to ask them how. So if you know how to do this and I don't, tell me how you are going to do it, and what's an appropriate timeline, and what's an appropriate amount of funds to set aside for this, and what type of projects have you done like this in the past, and what were the outcomes, and who can I talk to about those outcomes to make sure that this is actually true. Right. So there's a whole lot that goes into talking to people's references, and references of the references, not the on the books references, but the folks who who have worked with them before, can be very informative. And I think the final piece to a really solid decision-making process is evaluation. Mm-hmm. So after the decision's been made, and after you've put the time in to implement the decision, there needs to be a point at which you come back and reevaluate it. And you ask questions like, are we achieving the outcome we thought we were going to? Did it cost as much or as little as they said it was going to? Did the time frame that they provided for us end up being true? And what can we learn from this decision, both positive and negative? What were things that we did well and that they've done well in this process, and what are things that we could do better next time? And so I'm constantly improving that decision-making process, and adding or subtracting things from it as I learn, what is most effective sort of on the ground, in the situation in the moment.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that last component of kind of revisiting your decision after the fact and reevaluating it, because I think that's something that people in general don't do, but especially entrepreneurs, because, we're always going so fast and moving on the fly. It's kind of just like on to the next thing, and you never really take time to stop and assess if it really aligned with what the first initial goal was.
Right. And I think that taking the time to actually go back and evaluate it is a good way that we as entrepreneurs can slow ourselves down and not take part or not allow ourselves to be forced into a firefighting type of situation. Yeah. Because a lot of times, in my experience at least, when I have felt like I was putting out fires, sometimes they were fires that were my fault. Right. Because I had made decisions that were short-term in scope, and they really required a long-term perspective. And so that's where I think evaluating and thinking through, okay, did I appropriately account for the big picture in this decision on all fronts is extremely helpful for the next decision, to make sure that I'm not only not creating new fires, but also hopefully putting out old fires at the same time. Right. And planting new trees too. It's all, you bring it full circle.
For sure. Yeah, you made a good point as far as the kind of firefighting feeling or mentality, because I feel like when you're that type of stress, or you have that feeling, emotion when you're going to a decision, it's never good.
Yes.
I read in a book once that we should make decisions based on our standards, not our emotions. What do you say to that?
I think that's true. I think it's difficult to do that. Actually, as I was thinking through what I was going to say here, I'm no expert by any means in the types of things that derail good decision making, but there are a whole bunch of them out there. Yeah. And so that's something that, I'm familiar with what those things are for me. Like you mentioned, being that sense of being in a firefight makes it hard to make good decisions. Being tired makes it hard to make good decisions. Feeling stressed and overwhelmed and like you don't have resources makes it hard to make good decisions. But I think, there's general trends of what makes it hard for all of us to make good decisions. And then we have specific things that are true for each of us. So I think that's something, as an encouragement to fellow entrepreneurs, that's something I would look at. Yeah. As part of your evaluation process after a decision is, did I accidentally get sucked into, a common sort of tripping point or decision-making error? And do I see a trend in what tends to push me towards making unwise decisions or just not making the best decision that I possibly could? And if so, what can I do in the future to try to combat that?
Yeah.
So, for example, one of the folks that I work with has said, I do not make any important decisions after, wait for it, 10 a.m.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, okay, either you get up extremely early or you are working the 4-hour work week like there's no tomorrow.
Yeah, no kidding.
Her point in that is that our brains lose our edge after just a couple hours of working. And so any important decisions need to be done early in the day when we're fresh.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I have that high a level of commitment to, early morning decision making. You can't start too early too. That's
Right.
probably a problem for some people.
Yeah, that's
you don't want to be overly influenced by caffeine or whatever, might be getting you out of bed in the morning. But I think it's important to think through when are we at our peak decision-making capacity, and try to harness that for optimal results.
Yeah. Thanks. I want to go back to a point that you made as far as timeline and giving yourself a kind of in deadline to decide something. I feel like so many times we have the paralysis by analysis type effect going on. And especially when people are trying to get something off the ground initially. For new entrepreneurs, they have an idea or they have a business idea that they want to pursue, but then they never execute it because they never really give themselves that timeline. Besides the timeline, do you have any other ideas or advice for fellow entrepreneurs who are reluctant or hesitant, just falling behind in executing their idea?
How bad do you want it? I think that's where it starts and ends. Yeah. If you want to finish, you have to start sometime. And you have to decide, how important is this to me? How committed am I to seeing this through? It kind of goes back to what we started this conversation with. What is your why? And how strong is that? Because quite frankly, if you're questioning that right out of the gate, once you get into about the 34th lap of the marathon, you're gonna be done a long time ago. And so you've got to have a really strong, clearly articulated, I would argue written down, so you can go back and refer to it. But you also just have to have that sense in your gut that this is worth doing. And because it's worth doing, I'm going to do it even when it gets difficult. And you just have to have that mentality that I'm not going to be derailed. I'm not going to stop because of any type of obstacle that I come up against. The outcome is worth the risk. The outcome is worth the hard work. The outcome is worth the uncertainty. And I'm committed and I'm going to get through this. And if you can't look yourself in the mirror and say that at the very beginning, it's going to be a tough road ahead.
Yeah. We're getting towards the end here. So I guess to kind of wrap us up on this topic specifically, it's inevitable, both in life and business, that at some point we're going to stumble and make a bad decision. So what's your advice to an entrepreneur or a small business owner who has made a bad decision and needs to bounce back?
Welcome to the club. I was very inspired actually. This fall, I read a biography about Abraham Lincoln. And as I'm sure you're aware, he's one of the most beloved figures in American history, politics, and I was shocked at the number of mistakes that he made as a president. Fortunately, to my knowledge, when I've made mistakes, no one has died. And let's try to keep it that way,
right.
Including me. But he made mistakes and hundreds of thousands of people died. And yet he was a great man. And the good decisions that he made outweighed the poor decisions that he made. And I don't know, I think there's poor decisions that come from inexperience, which those are the types of mistakes he was making. And then there's mistakes that come from intentionally ignoring warning signs or warnings from people around you, or just your internal sense of, ooh, this doesn't feel right. So I think that is where I have started in the past as I've analyzed mistakes that I've made is, okay, where were the red flags? Did I completely miss them? Did I ignore them? And, how can I not ignore them in the future? But, some of our most powerful learning really does come from having to evaluate the places that we haven't done well in the past. And I think that that's a choice that we have to make is, okay, the money's wasted, the time's wasted, I look bad, my reputation's, suffering because I made this mistake, whatever. But am I going to just let that damage happen and whine about it and cry about it? Or am I going to try to do something productive with the damage? Is that wasted money? Is that my tuition in the School of Hard Knocks? Yeah. Is that wasted time, quote unquote, actually just time spent learning lessons I didn't realize I needed to learn? Yeah. So I think a lot of it has to do with our mindset and not beating ourselves up, but choosing to actually see something positive coming out of that. I wouldn't have a whole lot to talk about on this podcast today if it wasn't for the mistakes I've made. So, hey, this is in some ways sort of the silver lining of that. And not only having a story and something interesting to talk about, but even better, in my opinion, now I have a really great decision-making process that has guided our company really well through some challenging decisions that we've had to make, like every company has.
So to wrap this up, I usually bookend the show with 2 questions. One being, what are some books and resources that have made an impact on your life or business?
Mm-hmm. A book that I just finished reading for the second time and am probably going to go through one final time to make sure I can extract the learning adequately, is about happiness. I'm trying to remember, the title is now escaping me. Oh dear. But it's by Sean Anchor, and it's about, it's an orange book. I'll send you the title after we get off here.
Yeah, sounds good.
But it's really connected to that mindset that I was just talking about. The premise of the book is that we've all been incorrectly taught to think that success creates happiness. And actually, he has tons of scientific proof to show that actually happiness helps create success. If we are happy, then it broadens our decision-making capacity. It helps us to think more creatively. It helps us to see possibility where other people might not. And this is especially important when things are hard. Yeah. The example we were talking about earlier with, if you made a bad decision or something didn't go according to plan or as hoped, and now you're trying to figure out, how do I fall forward? Mm-hmm. If you've got an optimistic framework, it really helps you to be able to move forward productively and to make good decisions under pressure. Is the book called The Happiness Advantage or Before Happiness by chance? The Happiness Advantage, right. Yes. Cool. I kept wanting to say The Pursuit of Happiness, and I was like, nope, that's Abraham Lincoln again. Wait a minute. Anyways. No worries. Appreciate the book recommendation. And then last but not least, where can people best get a hold of you if they want business or personal advice? Absolutely. Yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn, Lisa Smith. And when you message me, just mention podcast and I won't block you. That works. Always a helpful tip to give someone before reaching out on LinkedIn. Right. Well, I get all kinds of interesting things. So. Yeah. Don't we all? It's an interesting time we live in. Yes, it is. Great. Well, Lisa, thanks so much for your time today. It was a pleasure talking about decision making, and good luck to you in your business. I know you guys will continue to succeed. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share about what we've been doing, and hope this can be very encouraging and helpful to all the entrepreneurs who tune in.
That wraps up today's episode. We hope to have brought you some valuable key takeaways. Most importantly, whatever you learned, take action on it. Apply it to your life. Apply it to your career. Motivation and inspiration only come as a result of taking that first step. So if you're enjoying the podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe on whichever platform you found the show. You can also follow us on all the major social media platforms or contact us directly at genwhyleaders@gmail.com. That's GENWHY leaders@gmail.com. Until next time, I'm Eric Huey, and thanks for listening to the Gen Y Leaders Podcast.